Today I'm going to do two things that I tell people I really don't do. One is I'm going to take a custom order from somebody I've never met before. Usually I just do custom work for friends, neighbors, people I know, stuff like that. But every now and then somebody has a job they ask me to do and says, that sounds interesting, I've never done that before, so sure, I'll go ahead and do that. And in this case, it's a picket pin for horses. Another thing I don't ever do is horse stuff. I've never owned horses, so horse-related things have never been something I've done much of in the blacksmith shop. But the picket pin sounded like an interesting exercise. It's mostly just a long pin that gets driven in the ground, but it has a little ball at the end that you can drive in and a shoulder here that retains this ring. And the ring is the key part. That's where you tie the horse's lead rope so your horse doesn't get away in the middle of the night. So without further ado, let's see if we can make a picket pin. To make the picket pin, I'm starting with a piece of 7/8 round bar. So that's about 22 millimeter round bar, something like that. And this piece happens to be 16 inches long, so that's around 400 millimeters long. This is just something I happen to have on hand. I'm probably going to end up cutting it shorter before I'm done. I don't think I want this any longer than about 18 inches. But the first thing I want to do is upset the end so I can get a bigger head to drive it in, and then create a fuller around there that will retain the ring that the rope actually ties to. To do this upset, I'm going to work in the induction forge because I can get a nice isolated heat that way. Total time to our first heat is just over 60 seconds. By working into the corner of the upsetting block, I'm starting to create a bevel around the top of this. That will help me create a ball end for the struck end of this. This fuller groove is for the ring that you actually tie the horse's lead rope to. And that will need to be able to pivot in this groove so they don't get wrapped up around the stake. I'm going to clean up the ball in this little mini swedge block. This is one made by Derek Melton. And I'll put some butcher dies in the guillotine tool to create a shoulder below the lower retaining ring. The induction forge is great for these isolated heats, but I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the gas forge so I can heat this longer section up and draw it out more efficiently. At this point, I want to go ahead and draw this bar down to about 3/4 of an inch round, maybe a little less, but larger than 5/8 round. So somewhere in that 18, 19, 20 millimeter range for those of you on the metric system. And this is absolutely a job that you can do by hand at the anvil, working over the horn with a relatively heavy hammer. It can go pretty quick. It's still going to be a lot of work though, and it somewhat depends on how solidly mounted your anvil is. If your anvil's jumping around every time you hit the horn, the anvil jumps up in the air, this is going to be a little bit harder to do. But for me, it's a lot faster, a lot more efficient to do it under the power hammer. After all, that's why I own a power hammer. So that's how I'm going to go ahead and finish this project up. The power hammer is a luxury, not a requirement. As always, we start forging square, then once we get down to size, we'll go to octagon, and then we'll go to round. Even though we started with a round bar. Much more efficient. Well, that gets the pin completed. Might need a little bit of filing to clean it up, but not too bad. The next thing to do is turn my attention to the ring that will be captive up here. This is essentially making a large chain link. I'll do the forge weld on the chain link, put it on here, and then I'll give it a quarter of a twist that'll lock it in tight here, although it's got to be loose enough to still swivel, just not loose enough to come back off. And that should leave a ring on the outside of this that the rope can go through. For this, I'm starting with a piece of 1/2-inch round bar. I've cut that a little longer than 8 inches. It's just kind of a educated guess. So that's about 13 millimeters round by 210 millimeters long. Again, figure these dimensions out for what you want and pay attention to the end of the video if I got things a little bit too long, a little bit too small. Then you can learn from what I've done and adapt accordingly. I am going to go back to the induction forge for this because I just need a concentrated welding heat, and the gas forge is just way too big a forge chamber for what I need to do with this. And we'll start by putting a U-shaped bend in the middle of the bar. With the bar bent, I'm going to scarf both ends and then bend the scarfs in until they overlap. I'm not worried about a perfect U at this point. I'll do that after the weld is done. Setting a small anvil close to the forge helps ensure that I can get a good weld on this. I don't lose any heat going to the bigger anvil. This anvil also has a little bit smaller horn, which will be easier for rounding some of this up. This is the second ring. The first one had a couple of problems. I overheated it a little bit getting ready for the weld, and it cracked, and that's just not something that's easily repairable. So I was going to scrap it for that reason anyways, but I also think it was a little small. So this is now a 10-inch piece, or about 250 millimeters. The pear shape is so that at the end fits in the induction coils better. I'll round that up before I'm done. Now another tool I have available to make cleaning up that weld a little bit easier is this chainmaker's fuller. This is an old tool, something I found at a blacksmithing event somebody was selling. So I snatched it up, and it's got this little horn on it, and that gives a really good place to get in and work the inside of the chain link. Well, I thought I was going to need to make this a little larger diameter now that I've got the weld, but I can insert the ball in through the large end of this, and that looks like just the right diameter for the inside of that. So now all I really need to do is get that to stay on there. Going to heat this up, probably just put a quarter twist in it, I think is all it's going to need to hold it in place. And if it needs more, we'll twist it again, but then that'll leave us a nice good-sized ring to tie a rope into. I'm going to do just a little bit of filing on this just to make sure everything fits properly and runs smoothly. Now for a finish on this, I'm going to use straight beeswax. It's a little bit heavier finish than the paste wax is. But the reality is that it really doesn't matter what kind of a finish you put on something like this. It's going to be driven into the ground, so you're effectively sanding the finish off every time you use it. Just a matter of keeping it clean and drying it out so it's not all muddy and wet. Now the beeswax will help keep the ring portion from rusting. It needs to be able to pivot freely, but probably is going to need some kind of wax finish put on it from time to time, or maybe even a little bit of oil, just depending on what the conditions are it's being used in. But that part isn't being driven in the ground, so it's going to last a lot longer there. Well, there's our Picket pin with the top ring that swivels very nicely. That came out real good. Always afraid that's going to get tight when I do something like that. I'm going to have to fiddle and fuss with it until it starts to loosen up some. But this came out really good, and I'm quite happy with it. But it is a little bit too long. My measurements were 16 to 18 inches. I started with 16, upset the end, but then I forgot to remeasure it before I did the point. So I emailed the customer, asked if he'd like me to cut it off. We'll see what he says. It's only about a 5-minute job to cut this off, put a new point on it. Really not a big deal at all. It'll take longer for it to cool down than it will to do the work. Well, this is certainly a unique item. I've never made anything like this and probably never even thought to make something like this. It's kind of out of my normal style of work, but it's a very interesting piece and a good exercise. Another one of these things that involves several of the fundamental skills of blacksmithing. We started with upsetting, We did some drawing out. Then we did some bending on the ring, and of course some forge welding, which is one of the fundamentals we haven't looked at yet. But forge welding is a fundamental skill. I want to thank everybody that stopped by to watch the video. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch the videos that I make here at Black Bear Forge. I especially want to thank my channel members and my Patreon patrons. Channel members receive early access to the videos, and Patreon patrons, depending on what level you're at, not only receive early access, they also receive the videos ad-free. They get occasional behind the scenes or other exclusive content. Not much, all the how-to videos are still right here on YouTube. But Patreon patrons also get a few physical perks. I'm sending stickers out to some of them, forging some little leaves, bottle openers, and making some even nicer things for the people at the top tiers. So if you're interested in any of that, particularly the ad-free videos, be sure to check out Patreon. But for everybody, thanks again, and I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, have fun, try something new, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next video.